Thank you for standing. We'll just preach just a few moments tonight. I want to look at a few things this evening. Appreciate the good singing already. A tremendous job that the family did. And I love to hear families singing and worshiping God. And really appreciate the atmosphere we're able to preach in the night. I'm looking in John chapter 21 and verse 1 through 14. When I read the story of the disciples here laboring all night long to catch fish, there are some things that begin to resonate with me as I read these scriptures when it deals with the fact that they are toiled all night long trying to catch something and coming up empty. I don't know if you can identify with that yourself, but there's been many a time in my life that I have labored for something, sought after something that I thought would satisfy me, encourage me, and help me for whatever the purpose may be, and I've come up empty. You ever labored for something, struggled for something, sought after something, and your net just comes up empty every time you try to bring it in? You know how discouraging that is and frustrating that is? The empty net, when I look at this story here that they keep coming up the empty with, reminds me of a time when we had no future. Reminds me of a time in our life when we had no hope. You remember when every single day of your life when you woke up in the day and you sought after things to satisfy you. You sought after things that give you peace. You sought after things that gave you fulfillment, completion, and gave you excitement and happiness and joy. And yet when the party died down and the friends left and the music died down, you were still left empty. You remember the times when you went to the house of God, heard preachers preach and Sunday school teachers teach and songs being sung, and you saw other people get happy and get help, and yet you went home time and time again without any fulfillment. Reminds me of a time in my life when I come back empty, time and time and time again with no future. It also reminds us of a time in our life when we had no fellowship. May have already been saved, may have gotten saved by the grace of God, but then we didn't have a place to worship in. One of the things that my heart goes out to people about is when they're looking for a place, church to attend. When they're trying to find a place where they can worship God. You'll see them, they'll visit other churches, they may drop in on you. And then when you sit down and talk to them, they begin to tell you the horrible story about how they visited this church, and then they went to this church, and they went to this church and that church, trying to find a place where they could find fellowship. And service after service and church after church, they come back empty. Not every church across these hills has this atmosphere. You know that as well as I do. And we come back empty. You remember when maybe there was a day and time in your life in your youth you wanted a family. You may have been reaching in your 20s and you barely got diaper rashes cleared up, but you feel like you've already got to be married by the time you're 20. And so you start seeking after a family. You're wanting to find somebody, and one girl shoots you down after another, one boy after another don't look at you. You may have gotten a little bit older and you're looking for somebody, hoping God gives you somebody, and you keep coming back empty. Doesn't seem like God's given you what you're longing for. The empty net reminds us of a time when it comes to our following. And I know tonight that as a preacher, I've been preaching 27 years this past June. And I remember when I first started out in the ministry, nobody knew me. And I'd go down to the rest home and preach. I was preaching in 5 rest homes. When I started pastoring my first church, I was preaching in the jail ministry. Also, I was preaching every Friday night, every Saturday morning, 3 times in 3 cell blocks in a prison house, and then going around 1 o'clock in the afternoon holding my next service in the rest home, and then having a service at night. I'd done that for 4 years. Nobody knew me. The church I belonged to at that time was an unknown church. The pastor that I had at that time was messed up in sin. Things was going on in his life, so I had no help coming from him. There was no publicity coming from that crowd. The church I belonged to was small, and I never went to Bible college. Every once in a while, my pastor would get sick. Couldn't find a preacher to fill in for him. He'd think about it and realize on Wednesday night nobody's going to be there anyway. And so he'd finally give me the pulpit and let me preach. I'd get up and rip up everything that moved, preach on everything I thought was wrong, a few things I weren't sure about, blow everything out, make everybody mad, go home. I'd lay on the couch on my wife's lap and cry, literally would cry and say, nobody wants to hear what I've got to say. I remember a time when I had no following, when my ministry was empty. I wanted to reach people. I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. And yet I was involved in a ministry where there was nothing taking place, where it was empty. You remember a time in your life that your net may have been empty when it come to fire. You may have been living for God, doing what was right, but there was an emptiness in your zeal. You served God, but there was no excitement. There was no joy per se. You were doing what was right, but there was no excitement and zest and zeal and zip to the things of God. And so in your zeal for God, there was an emptiness there. But like these men, they come across the Lord, and the Lord told them to do something in particular that didn't make any sense. They obeyed what He said. They dropped the net on the other side. And now God has filled their net up. You remember when God filled your net up on these issues? You remember that one service when you had no future, and time again you kept coming up empty. But then there came that service where God burned faith inside your heart. The Word of God pierced your mind and your heart. You got up out of your seat, or it may have been a visitation program, or it may have been somebody gave you a tract, and for the first time, God gave you enough faith to believe Him, and you put your faith in Jesus Christ, and God did an eternal transaction in your heart, and now God took your net that once was empty, and now has filled it to overflowing with His blessing. You remember when God gave you that family, God gave you that wife or that husband, and then you prayed for children. You asked God to give you a family, and God blessed your home and began to give you children. God filled your net up with more blessings than you could have ever imagined. You remember as a child of God looking for that church, couldn't find one. Then that one Sunday, you walked into a place you didn't really know anybody selling the pew, and within a few minutes you knew you was right where you were supposed to be. You found that place of fellowship. You identified with the preaching and the singing, and something in your heart began to witness with you about what God was doing. And now you're excited about going to church now because you know you found the place of worship. You remember back early in your ministry when you first started and nobody wanted to hear what you got to say. Now you get the pastor of church and people show up every Sunday, give you a love offering. You preach the Word of God, tell them how sorry and low down they are, and they still give you a love offering and a place to stay. Hallelujah. You remember back when you first started off in evangelism, nobody wanted to hear you. Now you've gotten busy, and God's using you now. God's filled your net up. You remember when God filled you with the power of God for the first time? God gave you fire inside your soul, and God filled your net up. I'm glad that's not the entirety of my message because I'd be depressed right now. Hallelujah. But I want you to look again. Look at what happened after God filled their net up. The Bible tells us that the net was so full of the fishes that God had given them. This was what you would call a dream catch. This is the kind of catch that they would write about for years and years to come. The Bible talked about they were so heavy they could barely even get it to shore. As to describe this great number of fishes and how big it was and how large the catch was, the Bible tells us about this catch. He said, cast on the right side of the ship in verse 6, and you shall find. In verse number 6, they cast, therefore now they were not able to draw it for the multitude of fishes, the number of fishes. It was described as being a great catch with a number of fishes they got. In verse number 11, Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land full of great fishes. It tells you how many it was, 153. It tells you how many fish. This was not just a great catch. That would have meant there was a great number of fish, but it says they were great fishes. That means that every single fish was a trophy catch. Every fish was a trophy catch. It'd be like going fishing and catching a 10-pound bass. The moment you catch it and you finally get it in, you know this dude's going over the mantle. They got 153 of them. Just 153 would have been a miracle, but 153 trophy fish they've got in the net. This is a dream catch. They've gone from all night long, empty nets. Now God's blessed them with a miracle, giving them a catch so great they barely even got it into the shore. But notice in verse 8. The Bible said about this catch in verse 8, and the other disciples came in a little ship, for they were not far from the land, but as it were 200 cubits. Look at what they're doing, dragging the net with fishes. In verse 6, look at the way it describes it. And he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find. And they cast therefore, and now they were not able to draw it. Two different terminologies used here. The first terminology in verse 6 is they are not able to draw it. What that means is they cannot get it up off the bottom of the sea. The catch is so great they cannot get it into the boat. The Bible said in verse number 11, when it describes what they're doing, rather verse number 8, it says they were dragging it. The very thing that they've wanted, the very thing they've always longed to have, a dream catch, now, according to verse 8, was a drag. We'll preach on the thought tonight on, do the blessings of God drag you down? Do the blessings of God drag you down? I know that the world drags me down. I know that sin that I let in my life drags me down. I know the influence of extended family and co-workers and other people that have influence on my life. I know that it drags me down. But here's the story of men that experienced the blessings of God and it dragged them down. That same family you prayed for, that marriage, those children you prayed for, if you're not careful, the very blessing of God can drag you down. That ministry you always longed to have. Being a young preacher boy just starting out, hoping that one day God will use you. You've come to a time now that even that ministry can drag you down. That church that you always wanted the pastor and always have. Now you've gone in and the excitement's begun to dwindle. And now you've gone through a few fights and you got a little schism from here and there. And you start thinking, I wonder if it's time to go. God's blessings have dragged you down in the ministry. The fire that we once longed for, we used to pray for out in the woods and scratch around the ground and beg and plead God to fill us with the power of God. Now it's a drag to go get it. It can drag you down. I had Stennett Blue told me years ago when I went in evangelism years ago. And I just announced I'd gone into evangelism. I'd already been preaching for years. I'd already pastored 10 years. And I surrendered to go into evangelism. I'd intended on staying in evangelism for 20 years. And Brother Stennett Blue told me one time, we had preached in the same meeting, and he told me, he said, Brother Quall, there'll come a day and a time that you'll be a slave to your schedule. There'll come a day and a time that your schedule will dictate to you what you're going to do, and you're going to start finding it out what it means to really have to sacrifice for what God's called you to do. Brother Morgan, the first 50,000 miles was exciting. The first 100 motel rooms were thrilling. But after a while, it can get to be a burden. Brother Barnes, you know what I'm talking about, all those meetings, getting to meet different pastors and getting to meet different churches and being so thrilled to death that God's using you. And then the very same pastors that once excited you, now they burden you down. The churches that you once used to preach in and be so thrilled to death about, now they burden you down and they wear you down if you're not careful. I'm telling you, the blessings and the benefits of God that you've always wanted can turn right around and drag you down if you're not careful. So I don't believe it. There's church folk being divorced. There are church families being busted up. Preachers blowing their ministries. Why is that? It's because it became a drag. Young people that used to be excited about having a home where mom and daddy loves God used to pray for mom and daddy to get saved. Now God saved them. The problem is mom and daddy got too saved, and now all of a sudden your eyes has gone far away. You're looking to the world. The very blessing you always prayed for now has become a burden. We're warped in our nature that even when God blesses us and we get what we've always longed for, it can turn around and drag us down. I'm looking at the story here with these disciples, and I'm curious of what did they do to take the blessings of God that were dragging them down, convert the thing around, and get back under it again and reap the full harvest of what God wanted for them. I want to remind you that these are nets they dropped. They did not get hooked up with some bus tires in the bottom of the sea. They didn't get hooked up with a bunch of garbage at the bottom of the sea. They were hauling the blessings of God. They were hauling the good things of God that they couldn't get up. The catch that they've got there is a dream come true. I think about Jacob when he was at the Fort Jabbok and he crossed over, was going to cross over the next day. And while he was in the woods praying that night, the angel of the Lord came, wrestled with him, knocked his hip out of joint. He limped out of there, and somebody looked at him and said, man, what's wrong with you? And he just said, I got blessed. He just got the daylights beat out of him. I think about Naomi and Ruth in the book of Ruth, how that Ruth picked up and Boaz gave her all this barley and everything in her little sack, as it were. And she took it and tied it at the four corners and threw it over her shoulder, started walking back to the house. And as she walked, that frail body began to get wearied with the weight on her back, carrying all that blessing that she had been given by Boaz. When you go look up how much it weighed over 50-some pounds. Sometimes the blessings of God that you're carrying around can weigh you down. What I'm looking at tonight is how do you get out from under this and get back to the place where you appreciate the goodness of God. Tonight, as I look out over a congregation, every last person here has been blessed. Every person sitting here tonight, you've been blessed by God. So, preacher, I got problems, yes, but you've been blessed. From the youngest person to the oldest person with gray hair, you've been blessed by God. We're a blessed people. God's been good to every last one of us. The problem is if you're not careful, you can let that thing get twisted up on you, and you'll start thinking it's a drag. The fact of the matter is, if we do not do business with God hastily in these times, the very net that is pulling this cannot withstand the pressure over a long period of time. What was the disciples doing the first time they met the Lord? They were mending their nets, proving that these nets are not able to bear the weight and the load. This is a miraculous catch of fishes. They've never caught this many. And if they do not get it to the shore or do not get it on the boat soon, the net can't take the pressure. There's going to be a break in the net, and all the blessings that they just experienced are going to get out. If we don't get control of this, where God's blessed us, and we don't get that joy back and that thankfulness back and that gratitude back for the things that God has done for us, instead of being disgruntled and unhappy, even with the good things of God, if we don't rein it under control, it's going to cause us to lose it. There are preachers and pastors pastoring good churches, but because they've got their eyes on all the problems, they don't have no joy in it no more. There are evangelists that are wearied from the way. They're doing the very thing they used to dream about, and now it's a burden. There are women that God's blessed you, open your womb and give you children, and these children wear you down. If you're not careful, you may forget how much you used to pray for them. The blessings of God. So, preacher, what am I supposed to do? You tell them the net's not going to hold forever. This is a tragedy. The very same blessings of God, Brother John, that they caught in the net, if they don't get it in, will become an anchor. The net full of fishes, if you don't get it in, will become an anchor, holding you back and holding you down. Now, we can understand this about the world. That makes sense. But I'm talking about the blessings of God. So I don't believe it. You look into the faces of as many pastors as I preach for, and you see the hopelessness in their eyes, and you'd understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. If you looked in the eyes of many parents and families I've talked to and see the hopelessness in their eyes when they have a family that would be anything anybody else would ever want. They're literally the image of what everybody else is shooting for, but they cover it up, and nobody realizes how much heartache they're dealing with because they're not thankful for what God's given them. That same man that you say, man, I just want him. That's the one I want. That's the one I want. There may come a time you may be praying, Lord, if you'll get me out of this mess, I'll never ask for it again. It shouldn't be that way. Let me give you several things quickly. So, preacher, what am I supposed to do when it's dragging me down? Number one, you need to fight. You need to fight. So what do you mean fight? Fight what? Look at what Peter does when he realizes it's the Lord. The Bible said after they recognized it was the Lord in verse number 7, therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved said that Peter is the Lord. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girded his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and he cast himself into the sea. Now he'd been casting nets. This time he cast himself. He threw himself in the water. You'll notice that he literally jumped in to get to shore. There's something interesting he does not do. So preacher, what do you mean? He doesn't ask to walk on water. He didn't say, Lord, if it's really you on the seashore, bid me come to thee on the water. He didn't do that. When he realized this thing's a drag on them and they can't get it, and then he realized that was the Lord over yonder on the seashore, he wasn't there to impress nobody no more. He didn't want to say, hey, let me walk on water to you if you're really God. He didn't do that. He threw his coat on, jumped head first in to get to that shoreline. You know what you need to do when it's a burden and you feel like it's dragging you down? Don't tiptoe in the water. Don't sit back on the boat. Just jump all the way in. Get all the way in. It ain't time to quit. It ain't time to give up on your family. It ain't time to give up on the church. It ain't time to give up on the blessings of God. It's time to put your coat on, step up on the rail, dive in both, dive in straight all the way in and swim yourself to Jesus. It ain't time to quit. There are too many preachers that get it on their mind that this is too much of a burden, and then they sit back on the deck itself and don't do anything else for God. I'm saying when you're discouraged and down, jump all the way in. Just jump in it. Don't try to be a showboat. Quitting is not an option. Don't try to be a showboat and show everybody how spiritual you are by walking on water, because the last time you tried it, it didn't work. It's nothing about being super spiritual. When you're going through a time that the blessings of God are dragging you down, get on the altar, dive in head first and say, Lord, I don't want to quit. I'm not giving up. I'm going to stay with you, and I appreciate the blessings you've given me in my life. You need to fight. Number two, you need your friends. If you'll look, you'll notice that this is not the only boat. They're on this boat, and they're dragging this net. The Bible said in verse number 4, talking about how they, in the morning, Jesus stand on shore. He tells them to cast on the other side. The Bible said in verse number 7, therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. Peter jumped in. Look at what happens in verse 8. And the other disciples came in a little ship. Take out the parenthetical statement. I'm going to take it out in verse number 8. And the other disciples came in a little ship dragging the net with fishes. Now I want you to watch this. You know what that means? They're hooked to the same net. They're obviously hooked to the same net that Peter's got on his boat, and this thing's dragging Peter down in his boat, but there's another boat hooked to the same net, experiencing the same blessings, and they help get that net back to shore. You know what we need? We need to learn how to stand and fight for what God's done for us, and we need to realize at the same time we need fellowship. We need friends. We need somebody else that's in the same thing. They may not be in our boat, but they're hooked to the same net. They're hooked to the same cause. Every person I've ever seen get discouraged and get down and quit on God and quit on their marriage and quit on the church, every one of them has isolated themselves off. Nobody cares. Nobody knows. They've closed themselves off. It is a tactic of the devil. He tells you nobody cares, nobody wants it no more, and you're hanging on to a net. You can't get to shore because you think you're the only one. You're not. Preachers are wrapped up in cliques. They get in their little clique and they think they're the only ones. Boy, if we don't stand for God, what are we going to do? God's got other men. God's got a whole pile of other men. It ain't just a handful of people in the fundamental movement. There's men of God all over this country that love God. There's churches all over this country that love God. The devil will drive you into isolation, get you in your little cave, and tell you nobody else is left, nobody cares. You know why he's doing that? He's trying to get the blessings of God to drag you down so that you won't get at the shore. So, preacher, what do you need? Number one, you need to fight. Number two, you need friends. You ever seen anybody break a toe? Or have you ever broke a toe? Now, they don't. I broke my foot years ago, but I put a steel rod through my left foot. And it broke my foot, so I've never broken a toe. But if you go to the doctor and the doctor says, all right, now we're going to x-ray it, and yes, you do have a broken toe. But we're not going to put a cast on you. This is what we're going to do. We're going to tape the broken toe to the toe right beside it. And they call that the buddy toe. One's broken, and the other one you tape it to the one that's still whole. Let them hang around together, and the straightness of the one that's not broken will help the other one until it mends up. When you're going through times you're hurting and you feel like you're getting drugged down, you need somebody else. The only reason I've been preaching this long is because I've had enough sense to surround myself with people that I know that when I'm broken, they're going to help encourage me and keep me the way. He said, preacher, I'm the Lone Ranger. Well, he was a liar. The Lone Ranger was a liar. They should have called him the Lion Ranger. He had what was his name? Tonto. I'd be ticked if I was Tonto. Cooking all the food, ironing the clothes, and he goes off riding Silver. Oh, Silver, who's that matchman? That's the Lone Ranger. I wouldn't cook no more of his meals. I wouldn't wash his clothes. So you the Lone Ranger, you do it then. Even the Lone Ranger had to have Tonto. You need your friends. You need to fight. Number 3, you need a force. So what do you mean you need a force? What is it drives the boats back in those days? They didn't have a Yamaha outboard motor. What moved them? Somebody just blurted it out. One person's awake. Wind. Wind. Now here's my question to you. I can prove to you that there was no wind by this simple point. The Bible said about Jesus when he spoke to them, he's on the shore and he's far enough away from them they don't recognize him. They see him, the sun's come up, they see him, they see an outline of a man on the shore, but they're not close enough to see who it is. My wife and I, about a year or so, went to Manio. I was preaching a meeting in the Outer Banks, and I took my wife with me. Well, about 2 years ago, I was out towards Manio at the Outer Banks in North Carolina, and we went by where they keep them yachts. And I don't have the money for it, but I can covet. And so we went out there and looked at all these yachts they've got lined up in Manio. And while we was walking on one side of the canal, looking at the boats, somebody was talking. And they sounded like this right behind me, and I kept looking around behind me, thinking somebody was behind me. And I realized they weren't behind me, they were across the bay. And they were sitting on a boat, 3 or 4 people sitting there talking, never raised their voice, kept a low voice, kept a low tone. And I realized I'm hearing somebody that's at least 100 yards away from me talking at a regular tone. And the reason why I could hear them is because there was no wind. The water was just as flat and smooth as glass. There's a real calmness. And so as they spoke, their voice carried across the water. It shows me that there's no wind. If they could hear Jesus speak, he didn't yell out. The Bible said he said unto them, have you got any meat? And he's far enough away they can't see who he is. So he doesn't say, hey, children, have you got any meat? No, he just walked up and said, children, you have any meat? And his voice carried because there's no wind. Now, I hope you don't go during the summertime, but for good Baptists that go to the coast in the wintertime when nobody's naked on the beach, you can't stand on that beach and hear the person next to you talking because of the waves. They can be standing right beside you. You can't hear them because there's so much noise. That water that day had to be dead still for them to hear him. Listen to me carefully. If there's no wind in the sails, there's no way the boat can move those fish. Frankly, if there's no wind in the sail, you can't open the net up for fish to get in it. The only way that they got fish in that net was by the fact that Jesus said, cast on the other side, and it went, and he blew the wind. And it moved the boat and made the net expand. That may have been the reason why they didn't catch fish all night long, because the wind weren't blowing. We can't catch fish in the net until there's wind in the sails. You can't win sinners to God with dead sails. What's going on the outside and the wind getting in the sail will put fish in the net on the underside that nobody can see. They had to have something moving them to get that net back to shore. Can I tell you tonight, one of the reasons why we've gotten to the place the blessings of God are burdening us is because the wind's not in ourselves. We need the wind of God to blow and move us again. We can't get the fish back to shore until the Spirit of God blows in our sails again. Listen, the joy of the Lord is a strength. You lose strength when you lose joy. It's a blessing tonight to be in the ministry. It's a privilege tonight to pastor. It's a privilege tonight to preach meetings as an evangelist. It's a privilege tonight to go into a foreign field to preach the Word of God. It's a privilege tonight if you got a wife and children. You're blessed tonight if you got a good church where you can feel God. You're blessed tonight if you've got the blessings of God on your life. We'll all be thankful for it. The very things that we should be thankful for sometimes are the things that are weighing us down. You're going to need a force. Number 4, and I'm done. So preacher, what else I need? You need some faith. What I mean by this is that after Peter realizes this, he jumps in the water. The Bible said in verse number 9, as soon then as they were come to the land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid thereon and bread. Jesus said to them, bring the fish which ye have now caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to the land full of great fishes. He apparently has gone to the shore at this point after having swam to shore. And the first thing that he hears Jesus say is, bring the fish which you have caught. Now the first thing that Peter sees is that Jesus already got fish. Jesus don't need them to bring fish to the shore so he have something to eat. Jesus don't need a net to get the fish in the pan. I believe when Jesus walked up on the shoreline, he said, hey, fish, come here. Jumped out of the water, landed in his hand, he went and cooked him. Are y'all unbelievers? Why y'all act shocked? He didn't need their net to get a fish. Jesus doesn't need fish to prove he's God. And when Peter come out of the water, swam the shore, catch his breath, he looked, and there's Jesus with fish on the frying pan. Peter said, that's kind of odd. And then Jesus said, Peter, you want all them fish you're trying to get in? Go back out there and get them up. So preacher, what are you getting at? I'm going to tell you the reason why Peter got that net in with all them fishes, even though he'd been dragging it before. It's because he got a word from God. And the moment you get a word from God, there ain't nothing you can't do. What you once dragged around, you couldn't get to shore. The moment you get a word from God, you can get anything to shore then. I'm going to tell you the reason why we're hurting so much. We ain't hearing from God. I'm not talking about from the pulpit. I'm talking about in our private lives. In our place of prayer, we don't tarry long enough to hear from Him. When we sit down and read the Bible, we don't even tarry long enough to get something from Him. I'm telling you what, to fire you up and keep you appreciative of the blessings of God is constantly hearing His voice telling you what He needs you to do with your life. And find that fellowship with Him. So preacher, what do we do here? You'll notice here Jesus gets them all what is shore. They get the fish out of the water. Now I want to ask you a question. What do you think He did with the fish? He obviously didn't eat them himself because He's already got fish cooking himself. So preacher, what do you think He needed for? I think they took the fish to market. I think probably when they got the fish to shore, they stayed long enough to eat some fried fish that Jesus already had. Jesus weren't going to let them fish die in vain. So when they got to shore, they took a trophy catch, a great catch of trophy fish, went straight down to the market and sold everything they got off those fish. You cannot get the full benefit of God's blessings until you get it to Jesus. What God does in your life, all He's wanting you to do, what God's blessed you with in your life is bring what He's blessed you with back to Him. God fills your net up so you'll bring it back to Him so He can give you the full benefit of His blessings. Everything in the Christian walk is reciprocal between us and God. God blesses us, now we take our blessings to Him, and He gives us the full benefit. You going to preach without God? God going to fill your schedule up as an evangelist or a missionary. God going to fill your church up with people, and you're going to do it without God. You're going to find out real quick it's a drag. But if you take what God's blessed you with and run right back to Him with it, He'll help you get the full benefit of it. You think you're going to get married and have these kids and then you're going to do it without God? No. You want the full benefits of marriage? You want the full benefits of raising children? Keep going back to Jesus with it. Get a word from Him. He'll help you get the full benefit of all the blessings of God that He's put on your life. I think we're living in a day and time that Christian folk are doing it without God. They've learned Baba tricks. They've learned how to act like sheep. And we don't pray. We don't read our Bible. And they've been wondering why God's people are so burdened down. It shouldn't be that way. Years ago, we went to a Christmas festival in the town we used to live in. And they had this cart being pulled by horses. And I don't know nothing about horses. I just don't have time. But I got on that cart, and the guy that was driving the thing, I sat up front with him, my wife, and the kids got in the back where the hay was at. And I'm beside the guy, and he's driving this thing. And as we're going down the road, he's got those things over his eyes, over the horse's eyes. And I thought that was to keep the flies out of his eyes. And so they're going along, and I finally just, was kind of talk. I'm trying to learn a little bit something about horse. And I said, why you got those blinders on that horse? Because it was actually getting kind of dusk and it's dark. And there weren't no flies out because it was cold winter time. And I said, why you got those things on his eyes? He said, well, sir, those are blinders. I said, well, they keeping flies out. That's not relevant now because it's cold anyway. So they're not there to keep flies out of his eyes. He said, the reason we put these blinders on that horse is because that horse is like a rabbit. He can see behind him and in front of him at the same time. And he said, that horse pulling this cart, he has the power to pull this cart without really being a problem. He said, but that horse, if he can see behind him what he's pulling, he'll get it in his head that what he's pulling is going to run over him. So we put blinders on him so he can't see what he's pulling. He can just feel it. And he pulls, and that blinder keeps him from panicking, break out of the traces, as you would call it, and take off running. Because he'll get it in his mind that what he's pulling is going to run him over. Can I tell you, sometimes God blinds you to what you're dealing with. You got the power to do it. God give you the ability to do it. But if you're not careful, you get looking around at what God's blessed you with in your life, you think it's going to run you over. I got good news tonight. God didn't bless you to bury you. God bless you to be good to you. Preacher, thank you for letting us preach tonight.